All right, great. I'm Charlie,
I'm Chris.
and we're here to talk about 3 recently devanned in-store crown jewels, all of which are from Uganda, all of which are from one of my favorite producer groups in the world, which is called Mountain Harvest.
Yep.
There's a lot to say about this group. I certainly have said a lot in the source segment online, so there's plenty of background there to read about Mountain Harvest. But for the sake of just like getting at the flavor and getting at the supply chain, let's talk about these coffees.
Yeah.
We have a honey, we have a natural process, and an anaerobic natural process. All 3 of these are from, I would say, lesser known regions in the west and the southwest of Uganda, which are highland territories, but are very rare and not nearly as developed as Mount Elgin, which is sort of the best known Arabica producing part of Uganda.
Let's take it back a step. How did you get introduced to Mountain Harvest? Like, what's your background here? What makes you love this working with them so much?
It was a little startup group. They weren't even called Mountain Harvest, and they were funded in the very early days by Lutheran World Relief. And they had set up like a little team that was in the former dry mill of a bankrupted local cooperative union that was based out of Mbale, partway up Mount Elgin.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like the whole setup for Mountain Harvest is this very like prescient scenario where you have like a group of very idealistic people who had local leadership who were stepping up after this giant cooperative union sort of fell apart, leaving tens of thousands of coffee farmers with fewer options for selling their coffee. And Mountain Harvest started really strong and really deliberately, slowly building up this value chain of smallholder farmers. Unlike a lot of their competition in Mount Elgin, when Mountain Harvest started in like 2017, they were really focused on the farmers themselves producing excellent quality coffee all the way up to dried parchment, which on the mountain is typically not how Arabica is produced. Another big exception of this being Sippy Falls, which pays really good prices, but still buys whole cherry, processes centrally at elevation. They produce really good coffee. The farmers themselves are not processing it, however. Mountain Harvest was really focused on farmer empowerment. And as part of their original structure, they built out like financing structures, insurance structures, farmer training. They trained local agronomists in the field. They eventually started opening localized storage facilities and also smaller, really focused, like individual community central processing sites so that farmers could come together and process their own coffee in more efficient ways. So Mountain Harvest really like started with these strong ideals and the strong vision from the beginning. And they did it after a really large umbrella organization in the region had kind of fallen apart. And so I love the story of Mountain Harvest, but even if I did, that wouldn't necessarily mean that the coffee is worthy of being a crown jewel or that it's really excellent. But the coffee continues to get better year after year. So every year I'm sort of bugging all the other traders and the crown about getting in on Mountain Harvest coffees with me and making sure everyone gets to taste the samples and all that stuff.
I mean, the good news is you don't have to bother me too much about it at this point, because they are great. They speak for themselves in the cup, and then the story behind it is fantastic. So Mountain Harvest has been the primary source for crown jewels from Uganda for at least, I want to say, the last 2 to 3 years, if not a little bit further, possibly.
Yeah, it's true. Most people have not tried really excellent coffees from Uganda before. The truth is that there's still, even in 2026, when we feel like every mountain on earth has been excavated to its maximum capacity for microlot coffee, that's not necessarily true in Uganda. And a lot of buyers who are really familiar with Kenya profiles, really familiar with Ethiopia, even Uganda, Burundi, maybe like southwestern Tanzania, are just kind of like illiterate when it comes to Uganda. And it's in no fault of their own. It's because there's so little coffee available that sometimes it just kind of, like, you just don't ever encounter it, you know? That's one of the reasons I like having it.
So little good coffee available, because Uganda is like Africa's second largest coffee producing nation and actually exports more than Ethiopia, which is kind of wild.
At this point, Uganda is exporting like 9 million bags of coffee.
That's a ton of coffee.
And more than 80% of it is Robusta.
That's right,
because of the landscape.
But we have these pockets in Mount Elgin area, and then in the south and southwest where Arabica is growing but sort of unrecognized in a lot of ways, at least until recently. So, so is that where these are where all three of the crown jewels are coming from? Is the alternative regions to Mount Elgin?
Exactly. Yeah. The honey processed coffee that we have is coming from the Rwenzori Mountains, which is on Uganda's border on the west with DRC. And then the natural and the anaerobic natural are both coming from an even newer smallholder project that's in the Kigezi Highlands, which is in the southwest corner of the country that borders with northern Rwanda and actually shares an almost identical landscape and terroir. It looks like northern and western Rwanda in this part of Uganda. And is very breathtaking and has great quality potential, of course.
Should we talk about quality, I guess?
Let's talk about the coffees, yeah. So the honey processed coffee. This one I really like because of not only how it tastes, but also the Rwenzori Mountains, while considered, generally speaking, underdeveloped for specialty coffee. In other words, there's a lot of potential, there's high elevation, there's a lot of different terroirs because the Rwenzoris are so dramatically steep. At the same time, there's not a lot of great coffee being produced. A lot of it is low quality, dried naturals that export as really cheap grades. A lot of different specialty groups have attempted, different projects in the Rwenzoris to produce or sort of refine the quality that's there, but very few are doing like an excellent job. The microlot that we have, however, is not a full natural. It is a honey processed coffee. So it's like a further refined cup of coffee is like a cleaner, more delicate version of the terroir of the Rwenzoris than we typically see with full naturals.
One of the things that I like about the honey processes that we've been getting a lot recently for crown jewels in general, but also especially East African honey process, is that they resemble, in some ways, almost more like elevated washed coffees than they do like fruit forward versions of those. So this coffee definitely has fruit to it.
Yeah.
And it comes through even more in the brew that we recently tasted than I think it did on the cupping table, but it also has those really bright, punchy acids and that like tea-like structure that I love about my favorite like East African, like everyday porch pounders, And we're going to be featuring this as an espresso here at the Crown. It's got that like bright zippiness that really cuts through. It's also like perfect for the first cup of the morning because it really just like kind of wakes up your taste buds in addition to caffeinating you. I love it. I get hints of apricot. I get hints of dried berries in like the cleanest, most possible way in this kind of coffee. And then there's all this other sort of like lemongrass and oolong tea that I think is just really fascinating about the cup. But
totally agree, especially on the oolong tea, like umami aspect to the balance. I get a lot of that, which I really love. Yeah, it's an invigorating coffee. It's clean, it's syrupy. It does have a little bit of that expected honey influence in the coffee, in that like the sugars are a little more concentrated and the flavors are a little more like kind of banana-y or honey or caramel, things like that. But it also has like this like wonderful basil quality. I agree on the lemongrass. It's great. And the balance is really clean and really delicate.
Yeah, really spectacular coffee. We bought the least of it compared to the other crown jewels, so I think it's going to go pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm thrilled about it. It's one of my favorite coffees of the year.
Yeah, me too.
And then we've got two naturals. One of them is an anaerobic, like pre-fermented, basically, or people might call it like oxidized.
Yeah.
And then a more traditional, like standard natural process. And these are both from
the
Kigezi.
That's right, in the southwest corner of the country.
Okay.
Okay, so the Kigezi Highlands are, if you picture Western Rwanda, you see, really steeply terraced mountains, a lot of organized high elevation farming. You picture sort of deep blue lakes, breathtaking high elevation agricultural zone that just seems to go forever.
Yeah.
Kigezi resembles this terroir. It's essentially an extension of Rwanda's high elevation hills country into southwestern Uganda. In southwestern Uganda, it eventually stops and gives way to the giant central lowland territory that the rest of the country is really known for, where all the Robusta is being produced. But this one little part of Uganda looks a lot like Rwanda, and it produces coffee a lot like Rwanda. However, unlike Rwanda's coffee infrastructure, Uganda's coffee in this area is not very well developed. There's a lot fewer smallholders here than there are even in the Rwenzori Mountains, certainly in Mount Elgin. It's a lot less competitive. It tends to be more passive, and just like Rwenzori's, historically, this region, even though it has great Arabica quality potential, doesn't produce or export many notable high specialty grades. So again, Mountain Harvest, like a lot of specialty groups, is looking to identify new highland areas that have underdeveloped potential, and the Kigezi Highlands are one of those areas.
And it's just super exciting that they were even, able to get this coffee to us in the condition that we tasted the pre-shipment and the offers. In a lot of ways, I feel like developing projects like this can be kind of fits and starts in some cases, but these coffees showed up on arrival.
I know. It's great. It's like looking at the pre-shipment notes and the arrival notes, it's almost like the rest that the coffees got during the long ocean transit just allowed the flavors to open up even more. Like, they're so open and available. There's so much complexity to taste in both of these coffees. And I like tasting them next to each other because it really illustrates the influence that a fermentation can have on an existing terroir. Because the natural process coffee, one of our crown jewels, is a really straightforward, low intervention natural. This is cherry picked, delivered, moved to a screen bed, and it's left there and rotated until it reaches 11% moisture. This is about as straightforward and natural as you can find. And I mean, the flavors are frankly amazing.
Yeah, cup profile is really berry forward. It's got a lot of echoes of other maybe more famous or more well recognized East African natural coffees. There's a really lovely florality to it, just this kind of rosewater effervescence that kind of lilts on the top of the palate as the rest of it kind of sinks down in, and it's got the Ugandan kind of chocolatey base, but it's the very sweet, very, very decadent, and very much like one of the best, I think, traditional straight ahead natural coffees I've had in a while.
I would definitely say so. It's definitely giving Misty Valley. Yeah. You might say. Yeah, lots of lavender for me, blueberry. It's sort of like deeply cooked caramel. It's like buttercream-like. There's rose, there's pink grapefruit, there's cotton candy. There's just all these wonderful, complex, sugary flavors, as well as a really articulate, fruity, floral series of top notes, which I really love.
Yeah. So if you're into the Ethiopian natural flavor profile but are looking for alternative sources, this is an excellent option for that. And we were offered a decent amount of coffee from this batch, and we took quite a bit of it. So
we took as much as we could.
I'm really excited about how much of it we have available, because it really is while I prefer to drink the honey process, the natural is the one that it just jumps off the table. It's just so good.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we should talk about our other crown jewel from the Kigezi Highlands, from Mountain Harvest, which is the anaerobic fermented natural.
So what's the process like on the anaerobic side of this? They're pre-fermenting coffee cherries basically, and then drying as whole fruit. Is there a specific methodology to the oxidation?
Yeah, there is. In that, every fermentation requires a lot of decision making in advance. Mountain Harvest has had 6 or so years of iterating their processing with Mount Elgin farmers before they started working in these western regions. So they already had a processing expert, in-house working in Mount Elgin. They had done a lot of farmer trainings, a lot of trial and error to figure out how to really maximize, from a processing perspective, the cup quality from high elevation Uganda. So they simply brought a lot of that knowledge to the Kigezi Highlands, and they were able to quickly iterate these profiles in order to make some pretty explosive coffees. This anaerobic microlot it used a dry cherry fermentation in sealed containers for 72 hours before removing the cherries and putting them directly on raised screen beds to dry. So nothing fancy, no additions, not even water into the fermentation. It's just sort of a quick maceration of the cherry, if you will, in an anaerobic environment, and then spreading it out and letting it dry. They do a couple of days in the sun of skin drying to help dry off the residual sugars real quick, and then they move the coffee to dry in the shade for the rest of the time. So compared to our other crown jewel from this area, which is a low intervention natural process, This one is anaerobically fermented, and it's also dried in the shade, which is going to extend the drying time and definitely accentuate a lot of the processing character and the fruit character as it is absorbed by the seed.
Yeah, yeah, really fascinating coffee, super bold, not ashamed to announce that it's like anaerobic in the cup, you know?
Oh, for sure.
It's got those like slightly more wine forward types of flavors. I had a really nice Basque apple cider yesterday, and in some ways it reminds me of that. The cider's like a little bit cloudy. It's a native yeast fermentation, and it's definitely got that kind of like lacto ferment forward type of flavor where it's a little bit sour but a little bit sweet. I don't know, what's your impression of the cup here?
I mean, my impression was like exactly that. As we were tasting this anaerobic microlot with the natural process side by side, I wrote in my notes, it tastes like the natural plus a very effervescent apple cider on top. It does have like a kombucha-like dryness or minerality to it, but it also maintains a lot of the dried fruit flavors of the natural. The florality is there, but it has been transformed a little bit because of the processing, so it comes across as more of like a chamomile or cinnamon or cider-like quality. It reminds me a little bit of hops in a way. It's not cloying and it's not dry. It's very balanced, but it is definitely transformed. So tasting this next to the natural is like extremely clarifying from a processing perspective. It's about as good a comparison as a cupper can hope, I think. You know, to put these two processes next to each other.
Absolutely. So this is like the silly, more adventurous type of coffee. If you're looking for something that's, you know, off the beaten trail and also just kind of on the slightly wilder side without being out of control, because it does feel very much like there's been a lot of you know, intervention is the word that we keep using. It's humans that are involved that are really shaping the process with a lot of dedication and intent, you know? I
mean, and if you love acidity, this has a lot of it and a lot of different types of acidity working together as a result of that fermentation.
So lots of excellent coffee from Uganda this year, and we're super proud to be featuring these coffees as crown jewels. And I just want to thank you for your help sourcing them, because it's been a pleasure, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the pleasure is all mine. It's great to see them out for sale, and you know, I hope they make it into the hands of a lot of newcomers to Uganda microlots, because I think they're gonna, you know, change a lot of minds and make some great impressions, as they always do. And every year with Mountain Harvest, we do what we can.
Well, I think we did pretty well this year. All right.